In the summer of 1944, the Pacific Ocean became the backdrop for one of the most pivotal battles of World War II. The Japanese Empire, once victorious in its sweeping conquests, was now gradually being forced to retreat, losing territory island by island to an unrelenting American offensive. The Marianas Islands, Saipan, Tinian, and Guam, emerged as a focal point of global significance. Whichever side controlled these islands would gain a critical launching pad for future operations. While Japanese pilots continued to place their faith in the superior maneuverability of their Zero fighters, they were unaware of the storm about to break upon them. The campaign in the Marianas was preceded by months of fierce clashes across the Central Pacific. American forces had captured Tarawa and the Marshall Islands, shifting their focus toward the inner defenses of Japan's empire. To Japan's military leaders, the Marianas represented far more than just another strategic outpost. These islands were the doorway to the Philippine Sea and formed part of a critical defensive perimeter shielding the Japanese homeland. If they fell, American bombers would gain access to mainland Japan, placing Tokyo within striking distance and threatening catastrophic consequences. Determined to prevent such an outcome, Japan's leadership prepared what remained of its carrier fleet for a decisive stand. On the other side, American commanders, led by Admirals Chester Nimitz and Raymond Spruance, recognized the high stakes involved. They planned an audacious assault set for June 1944, with amphibious landings on Saipan supported by the largest naval task force ever assembled at that time. To protect the invasion force, American aircraft carriers brimming with hundreds of warplanes were primed to counter any Japanese attempt to disrupt the operation. Central to this air force was the Grumman F6F Hellcat, a robust, heavily armed fighter designed to dominate aerial combat. As both fleets closed in on the Marianas, Japan's Imperial Navy struggled to muster its strength. Admiral Jisaburo Ozawa, commander of Japan's mobile fleet, devised a bold plan: lure the Americans into range using long-range aircraft, then strike with waves of fighters and bombers to annihilate their fleet before a beachhead could be established. However, this strategy masked serious underlying issues. The seasoned veterans who had defended Japan in earlier battles like Pearl Harbor and Coral Sea were now largely gone. In their place were inexperienced recruits rushed through truncated training regimens that barely spanned weeks. Meanwhile, lessons from earlier campaigns had honed American tactics and operations. The U.S. Navy had perfected coordinated carrier strikes, trained disciplined pilots in large numbers, and secured a logistical advantage unmatched by their opponents. Their carriers were not merely air bases at sea, but hubs of sustained power, supported by oilers, supply ships, and repair crews capable of keeping them operational indefinitely. In contrast to Japan's dwindling capabilities, American forces were well equipped with advanced aircraft, a surplus of skilled personnel, and overwhelming resources. The stage was set for a monumental battle in the Pacific. For Japan, the Marianas Campaign represented a desperate attempt to halt an inexorable American advance before it reached their shores. For the United States, it was another calculated step toward victory, an application of overwhelming force against fierce resistance. Over those islands, two air forces prepared to push their machines and their pilots to their limits. The Japanese Zero fighter, once an icon of dominance over the Pacific skies, was now facing an adversary designed specifically to neutralize it. Awaiting them were 500 Hellcats, a fleet equipped with armored cockpits, superior firepower, and powerful engines. The battle over the Marianas would see Japan's illusion of air superiority shattered amidst gunfire and the deafening roar of American engines. The Grumman F6F Hellcat was not a product of chance, but a direct response to the lessons learned in war. Introduced in 1943, it was designed as an answer to Japan's Mitsubishi Zero, an aircraft that had dominated the skies during the early years of the conflict. While highly agile and capable of extreme climbs, the Zero sacrificed armor and firepower for maneuverability. Recognizing these vulnerabilities, American engineers created the Hellcat to exploit them. At its core lay the Pratt & Whitney R2800 double-wasp radial engine, generating over 2,000 horsepower, nearly twice the output of its predecessors. Unlike the fragile Zero, which crumbled under sustained fire, the Hellcat could absorb significant damage and survive combat encounters. It was not uncommon for these rugged fighters to return to their carriers riddled with bullet holes, but still airworthy. Speed, durability, firepower. The Hellcat possessed all the qualities needed to claim dominance in a theater where technical superiority and pilot proficiency were paramount. The Marianas marked not only a turning point in Pacific warfare, but also a brutal reckoning in aerial combat. It was here that outdated doctrines clashed with modern innovation, where the cockpit of the Hellcat was meticulously armored, shielding its pilot from the grim fate that had claimed countless others in early battles. Its weaponry offered another key advantage: 650 caliber Browning machine guns mounted on the wings, capable of tearing through enemy fighters and even delivering significant damage to more robust bombers with controlled bursts. American pilots quickly grasped the power of a Hellcat's single pass, which could utterly devastate enemy formations. Moreover, the aircraft's durability allowed it to press on in combat far from its carrier, highlighting an exceptional endurance that its opponents often lacked. In comparison, the Japanese Zero, with lighter armament and minimal armor, seemed at times more prey than predator, struggling to match the Hellcat's prowess across the vast Pacific skies. Numbers played an equally pivotal role in this evolving confrontation. By the time of the Mariana Campaign, the United States was mass-producing Hellcats at an astonishing pace. Grumman's production lines churned out these fighters in such abundance that they became the dominant naval aircraft of the war. This industrial achievement allowed U.S. carriers to field entire air groups filled with Hellcats, replacing losses almost as quickly as they appeared. Japan, in contrast, faced a dire situation. Its factories were deprived of critical resources, and its pilot ranks were rapidly dwindling without sufficient replacements. The disparity painted an ominous picture for those relying on Japan's once supreme air power. The ascendancy of the Hellcat wasn't just down to superior engineering. Tactics played nearly as significant a role. American aviators benefited from longer and more structured training programs, grounded in disciplined doctrines that emphasized coordinated group operations. Units of Hellcats operated in synchronized formations, utilizing advanced maneuvers such as thatch-weave tactics and mutual defense strategies. Pilots were conditioned to protect one another's blind spots, thwarting Japanese attackers from exploiting weaknesses. This polished teamwork transformed the Hellcat from a capable aircraft into an instrument of devastating tactical precision. For Japanese pilots accustomed to singular duels where the Zero excelled, encounters with these squadrons proved disorienting. Stories filtered back that the once intimidating Zero was losing control over combat engagements, facing enemies whose planes seemed impervious and whose tactics outpaced their own. By spring 1944, Japanese forces began to hear troubling reports from surviving aviators. Tales described fierce battles where their legendary agility and firepower didn't suffice, leaving many to return shaken by encounters with this new foe. Whispers grew louder within Japanese ranks that a shift had fundamentally altered the dynamics of aerial combat. When the Mariana Campaign drew near, over 500 Hellcats prepared to solidify this hard truth in the Pacific skies. To the U.S. Navy, they symbolized both protection for their invasion fleets and a relentless force against Japan's air divisions. For the Japanese, however unknowingly at first, they heralded an impending catastrophe. As these critical months ahead unfolded, Japanese pilots clung to unwavering faith in their trusted Zero fighters. For years, these sleek aircraft had epitomized Japan's dominance in aerial warfare, humiliating Allied forces across Pearl Harbor, the Philippines, and Southeast Asia. New recruits entering service in early 1944 were regaled with tales of legendary Zero aces who once ruled the skies without equal. There was a deeply ingrained belief that no American design could rival their fighters' speed, climb capacity, or unmatched agility in close-range turning battles. Yet this confidence would soon clash with the stark realities lurking over the Pacific. Morale among emerging Japanese aviators remained far more complex than official narratives suggested. By this stage of the war, many seasoned veterans from earlier triumphs had been lost with no truly skilled replacements among their successors. Training programs once defined by rigorous preparation were drastically shortened to mere weeks. Young recruits entered combat with only foundational instruction and outdated tactics emphasizing dogfights, an approach ill-suited against coordinated formations perfected by American forces. While outwardly brimming with youthful vigor and confidence, many harbored unspoken concerns beneath their stoic exteriors. Theirs was no longer dominance but a defensive posture. Japanese officers did their best to reassure these pilots, emphasizing their enduring courage and unwavering discipline as hallmarks of Japan's strength. The Zero's legendary maneuverability was cited as a tactical advantage in close quarters, reinforcing beliefs that martial discipline could overcome technical disparities. The narrative painted American aviators as inexperienced adversaries, a perception rooted in echoes of Pearl Harbor's surprise attack. However, whispers of doubt had begun infiltrating their ranks. Intelligence accounts carried unsettling reports from Rabaul and the Solomons about unexpectedly fierce engagements where the tide no longer favored Japan's aircraft or pilots. The American Hellcat proved to be a formidable adversary, capable of enduring heavy fire, diving faster, and climbing harder than Japan's renowned Zero. Pilots recounted engagements where the vaunted agility of the Zero no longer ensured triumph. However, within the stringent hierarchy of the Imperial Navy, such accounts were often dismissed as exaggerations or excuses from defeated aviators. Acknowledging that American engineering had outpaced them was inconceivable, a bitter admission that Japan's vision of air superiority was slipping away. As Japanese pilots readied themselves for combat over the Marianas, they stood precariously between confidence and denial. They clung to the belief that courage alone could offset their growing disadvantages, that the Zero's maneuverability would still dominate if they fought with honor and ferocity. Yet a lingering awareness of their challenges weighed heavily. Fuel shortages curtailed their training hours. Their preparation was rushed, and their squadrons were increasingly comprised of inexperienced recruits instead of veteran flyers. Despite these realities, when they launched from carriers and island bases in June 1944, they held firm to an outdated ideal of aerial supremacy, a belief that while the Americans might outnumber them, they would not be overwhelming nor untouchable. This illusion shattered as they encountered an overwhelming sight: hundreds of Hellcats rising in synchronized waves from the decks of an immense armada. The once intimate duels between rival fighters were about to transform into a horrific clash fueled by industrial might. June 19, 1944, marked this moment of reckoning. The American fleet, vast and bristling with activity, pushed steadily toward the Marianas. With Saipan already under assault, Japanese commanders recognized the gravity of this confrontation. This was the decisive battle they had awaited. Admiral Jizaburo Ozawa devised a bold strategy, planning to launch waves of attacks against the U.S. invasion force from beyond its counterattack range. Exploiting long-range bombers and carriers positioned west of the Marianas, he aimed to cripple the American Navy before ground reinforcements could solidify their hold. But as Ozawa received reports from scouts and radar stations detailing the sheer magnitude of the American force, carriers, battleships, cruisers, and destroyers stretching endlessly across the horizon, it became evident that their carefully laid plans would hinge on precision and surprise. Unfortunately for Ozawa, both were slipping away. Unbeknownst to the Japanese, American submarines had been shadowing their fleet and relaying crucial intelligence to Admirals Raymond Spruance and Mark Mitcher aboard U.S. command ships. The Americans were not only prepared, they were primed for action. As Japanese aircraft began launching, the U.S. Navy sprang into motion with meticulous coordination. Hellcats roared off carrier decks in streams, pilots swiftly strapping into cockpits as flight directors orchestrated seamless takeoffs. Aircraft ascended in disciplined waves, forming intricate formations even as they climbed. Observers from afar were struck by the scale and precision of this mighty war machine. The opening phase of the battle revealed stark contrasts. Desperate Japanese determination against calculated American readiness. Young and untested Japanese pilots were dispatched with orders to destroy American carriers at all costs, clutching keepsakes from loved ones and convinced they would achieve everlasting honor. Their commanders bolstered these hopes with assurances that the Zero still reigned supreme in the skies and that their courage would carry them to victory. But these hopeful narratives overlooked critical flaws: intelligence that was badly outdated, and an enemy far more advanced than imagined. American carriers, equipped with sophisticated radar systems, tracked incoming Japanese waves long before they neared visual range. Squadrons of Hellcats were directed with surgical precision to intercept positions, transforming the battle into a relentless ambush. Japanese formations, often disorganized or strung out over vast distances, found themselves surrounded by interceptors approaching from all sides. Below on deck, American sailors watched as chaos erupted in the skies above them. The horizon filled with contrails and thunderous engine roars, punctuated by flashes of gunfire. From carrier bridges, officers observed as black specks climbed into tightly ordered formations, blotting the sky with overwhelming strength. What unfolded was not merely battle. It was domination rooted in superior preparation, discipline, and technological advantage. The Battle of the Philippine Sea began with a staggering reveal of power that would devastate the Japanese aviators. While the first Japanese wave advanced, the Americans were not caught off guard. They had prepared meticulously, ready for the challenge. For pilots of the Imperial Navy, this marked the onset of a nightmare. The long-held notion of honorable duels fought on level terms vanished entirely. This was no duel. It was an overwhelming clash between a diminishing force and the full industrial and tactical might of the United States Navy. As the order for deployment came, the scene aboard American carriers transformed dramatically. Moments of calculated chaos on the flight deck swiftly gave way to controlled urgency as aircraft sprang into action. Carrier flight crews performed their intricate ballet of coordination, their yellow-shirted signal officers guiding Hellcats forward with precision. Engines roared and wings clawed into the sky in orchestrated formations. In mere minutes, a mechanical tempest unfolded. Nearly 500 Hellcats soared upward in perfect waves, their fuselages gleaming under the Pacific sun. To Japanese aviators racing toward their objective, this sight defied belief. An endless wall of American fighters dominating the airspace, shielding their targets. Among Japanese ranks, feelings of dread spread. Veteran pilots, recalling earlier encounters, grappled with uneasy truths about the Hellcats' superiority. Green and inexperienced recruits were startled by the sheer ferocity around them as their formations fractured under relentless pressure. American fighters descended with calculated ferocity, each maneuver guided by radar controllers who vectored planes directly into Japanese bomber streams. What followed was carnage. Hellcat formations utilized coordinated tactics like the deadly thatch weave to protect one another while shattering enemy units. Streams of heavy-caliber fire chewed through vulnerable Zeros, their delicate frames crumbling under sustained hits. Bombers trying to press toward American ships faced swift obliteration before starting their attack runs. For Japanese aviators accustomed to dogfights centered on agility and skilled evasion, their training seemed futile. Efforts to engage nimble turn fights were crushed, as Hellcat squads executed well-coordinated responses from multiple angles. Worse still, the lack of robust armor on Zeros meant that even minor hits resulted in catastrophic losses. Flames spread across falling aircraft while dark smoke trails carved despair into the skies above. Below, aboard U.S. carriers, sailors observed the destruction with a mixture of awe and grim affirmation. The sheer disparity in outcomes led them to murmur among themselves. It was no ordinary battle, but an outright massacre. History later branded this event with an infamous nickname: the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot. Despite their dominance, American pilots maintained vigilance. Courage remained fierce among Japanese aviators, who launched brave, yet ultimately futile attempts to breach defenses and strike at carriers. As some barely reached striking range, they were met by flak bursts from anti-aircraft gunners below, shredding what little remained of their formations. Survivors numbered few, and fewer still returned to spread tales of the encounter. The battle revealed devastating truths for Japanese forces. The once revered Zero had been outclassed, reduced to an obsolete relic against waves of disciplined Hellcats guided by radar precision. Within hours, hope dissolved into a desperate fight for survival, a fight many would lose. The aerial clash reached its merciless zenith as Japanese squadrons crumbled under relentless attacks, overwhelmed by an impenetrable steel wall of American defense. For American pilots, every engagement followed grim repetition. Radar-guided commands to intercept enemy flights, brief skirmishes marked by precision gunfire, and the inevitable spiral of enemy machines plunging into ocean depths. Fragile Betty bombers were mercilessly dismantled before reaching their intended domains, while Judy dive bombers proved equally vulnerable under Hellcat firepower from above. What unfolded over the Philippine Sea sealed its place in history not simply for its ferocity, but as a defining demonstration of technological superiority and tactical mastery. For Japan's aviators embroiled in this catastrophic encounter, survival became a fleeting hope. For many, it vanished altogether amidst the Pacific chaos that would forever mark the great Marianas Turkey Shoot. As they plunged downwards into sharply angled attacks, they were ripped apart by intense gunfire which tore their wings off during their dives. Later, American gunners on ships remembered that the sky was so dense with burning debris that it appeared impossible for any attacker to reach the fleet. Among the Japanese aviators, the astonishment was overwhelming. Numerous pilots had been taught to have faith in the superiority of the Zero fighter plane, with its unparalleled maneuverability and an almost mythical status gained early in the war. However, here, being agile was useless against radar-directed interceptions and well-coordinated teamwork. Surviving pilots told of desperate efforts to swerve, rise, and plummet. But wherever they went, Hellcat fighters awaited them. One Japanese pilot later confessed that he felt as if the Americans had an unlimited number of planes, each seemingly appearing from nowhere to unleash a volley of bullets. The sheer magnitude of the losses was astounding. As the combat concluded that day, over 300 Japanese planes had been destroyed, often with only a few American losses. Some Hellcat fighter groups came back to their carriers with incredibly high kill counts, with some pilots claiming 5, 6, or even 7 kills on one flight. One accomplished pilot, Lieutenant Alexander Vascu, shot down 6 Japanese bombers in just 8 minutes, establishing the Hellcat's fame as a plane that could transform capable pilots into legends. From the Japanese perspective, the ruin was not just in numbers, but also in spirit. Commanders who had assumed this was their chance to stop the American advance were now confronted with the reality that their carrier-based air force was badly weakened, possibly beyond the point of recovery. Their pilots, many with minimal training, had vanished in large numbers. The surviving pilots often returned deeply disturbed, their confidence in the Zero and their own strategies shattered. For the first time, murmurs began to spread, suggesting that Japan's period of air superiority was not simply challenged, but over. American pilots, in contrast, flew back to their carriers, energized by adrenaline, but also sobered by the scale of what they had witnessed. The devastation they had caused was unparalleled. For many it was exciting, yet also unsettling. It was not a fair fight between equals, but a complete annihilation of an enemy that had been surpassed in production, training, and overall capability. Still, they recognized its importance. The airspace above the Mariana Islands was no longer controlled by Japan. By nightfall, the Americans were able to confirm that their invasion fleet was safe, their carriers undamaged, and their dominance in the Pacific secure. For the Japanese, the air battles over the Marianas were not just a tactical setback, but a major strategic disaster. The heart of their carrier air groups had been wiped out in a single day. Their once esteemed pilots were scattered across the ocean. The Great Marianas Turkey Shoot exposed the undeniable truth. Regardless of the bravery of its pilots, Japan was unable to compete with the industrial and tactical strength of the United States. The consequences of the devastation in the skies above the Marianas were unlike anything the Japanese air service had ever experienced. Those who survived and made their way back to the carriers or the airstrips on the islands wore expressions of deep trauma, their eyes empty after witnessing entire groups of planes disappear in moments. The airplane cabins reeked of gunpowder and burned metal, and those who managed to get out frequently stumbled as if in a stupor, unable to understand how rapidly the situation had become so unfavorable. The men had grown up in a society that valued honor and believed in their own strength. The sudden change was deeply upsetting and overwhelming. Across the Philippine Sea, pieces of destroyed planes were afloat on the water. Hundreds of airplanes, many with the dead pilots trapped inside, plummeted to the bottom of the ocean, leaving trails of oil and pieces of wreckage spread out across the distant horizon. American sailors who observed the fighting from their vessels later remembered seeing parachutes descending gently like flowers. Some Japanese pilots were yielding to fate rather than continuing a battle that was already lost. Others chose not to jump, deciding to crash with their aircraft rather than be captured and disgraced. The ocean became a final resting place for many young pilots destroyed by the mechanics of a war they had no possibility of winning. For the Japanese High Command, the disaster signified more than just immediate casualties. It was the failure of a whole system of strategic planning. Since 1941, carrier-based airplanes had been the Empire's primary offensive weapon, the means by which they had achieved victory at Pearl Harbor and in subsequent operations. But with 300 aircraft destroyed in one day, and even more eliminated in the days after, Japan's mobile naval force was reduced to a mere shadow of its former self. The ships still existed, but with a shortage of skilled pilots and aircraft to launch from their flight decks, the fleet had lost its ability to fight. Even the most impressive aircraft carriers like Taihaho and Shokaku would soon be attacked and sunk by submarines, their destruction further highlighting how little was left of Japan's previously formidable naval power. Conversely, the spirits of American servicemen experienced a dramatic upswing. Aviators came back to their vessels, showing off figures of enemy planes destroyed, statistics that stunned superior officers. Every mission amplified the Hellcats' growing fame as the supreme fighter. Crews celebrated quietly with self-respect, understanding they had not just protected the invading military force, but had caused severe harm that would hinder Japan without end. Seamen marked triumphs on flight decks by painting sun symbols on the destroyed machines. Soon, the Hellcat's exterior was covered with marks indicating numbers of enemy planes shot down. Nonetheless, despite this pride, there was a deep understanding that this war was unfairly balanced, resembling more of a slaughter than a fair fight. The effects on strategy were felt without delay. Having neutralized air defense, American troops advanced, obtaining control of Saipan after many weeks of intense combat on land. From there, B-29 superfortresses would soon be airborne, ready to strike the mainland of Japan itself, bombing its capital along with other major cities. Therefore, the loss of the Marianas paved the way to the core of Japan, an insight that dawned on many Japanese aviators as they floated adrift at sea using life rafts or clung to debris. Their failure in the air translated to defenselessness back home, a situation they had committed to prevent, yet found themselves unable to stop. The news was a tragedy in Tokyo. National leaders who had assured the population of a change in the conflict's course were confronted with the devastation of their most skilled aviators. The few pilots who lived were heavily burdened by their shortcomings. They had flown bravely, but bravery alone had proven insufficient. They had come to realize, by the harshest means possible, that the conflict was now less about the spirit to fight and more about equipment, training, and the ability to produce. It was a competition in which Japan was no longer able to keep up. In subsequent years after the war, those involved in combat remembered the Battle of the Philippine Sea. The Americans looked back on it as a victorious moment that cemented their control over the Pacific region. They saw it as the point at which naval air power established itself as the unquestioned leading force in modern war. For the Japanese, it was remembered with bitterness and incredulity. It was a moment when hopes of unmatched air superiority were extinguished in fiery wreckage. The Hellcat, initially just another aircraft design, transformed into the embodiment of this shift. This plane represented America's industrial capability, organized tactics, and capacity to defeat its enemies through constant production and thorough training. Historians would later point out that the Hellcat's notability was found not merely in the numbers, but in the symbolism it embodied. By the close of the battle, the F6F's record in terms of destruction was exceptionally high. The amount of Japanese planes destroyed was significantly greater than the Hellcats lost. The pilots who operated them recalled the sensation of assurance the aircraft instilled, and its strength to withstand significant damage and still safely return them. Military veterans recounted moments of returning to their ships with extensively damaged wings and leaking oil, yet surviving. Compared to the delicate Zero, this robust resilience proved vital. For Japanese veterans, their recollections carried a heavier tone of sadness. Aviators who lived through the battles in the Marianas later conceded they had not fully appreciated the strength of the opposition. They had put their faith in the maneuverability of the Zero fighter planes and their own unwavering fighting spirit to achieve success. Yet they discovered that they were completely outmatched. Numerous pilots admitted that witnessing hundreds of Hellcat fighter planes ascending from the ocean was the point at which they understood triumph in the conflict was unattainable. Their nation did not have sufficient manufacturing capabilities, resources, or available time to compete with such a massive force. Decades afterwards, in personal accounts that were published, several individuals expressed that the loss of hope did not begin with the aerial attacks on Tokyo or even the nuclear devastation of Hiroshima. Rather, it began in the Marianas. This conflict solidified the aircraft carrier's status as the most important part of naval combat. The time of immense battleship skirmishes was finished. Future sea warfare would be decided by aerial supremacy. American aircraft carriers had deployed 500 Hellcat fighter planes in organized aerial assaults coordinated by radar, supported by supply vessels that guaranteed a never-ending source of fuel and weapons. Conversely, Japan was unable to maintain even a small portion of similar resources. The significant differences between the war-making capabilities of the two countries had been exposed. For the individuals who experienced the conflict, the Hellcat's lasting impact was both amazing and sobering. It provided the United States with the ability to control the skies and ensure dominance in the Pacific region. However, it also revealed the merciless power differences in modern warfare. The battles in the Marianas had not been a fair fight. It had been the overpowering of a depleted adversary by a manufacturing superpower. Contained within that harsh truth was the reality of the Second World War. Victory was not solely the result of bravery. It also belonged to the side capable of producing, educating, and deploying soldiers in numbers too immense to overcome. As the Pacific War approached its violent conclusion, the image of the Hellcat endured in both American pride and Japanese memories. For one nation, it symbolized triumph, while for the other, it signified impending defeat. The battles in the Marianas demonstrated that bravery alone was not enough to reverse the outcome of the war. 500 Hellcats had ascended from the sea, and with them, the destiny of the Pacific region was determined.